Vespasian, originally named Titus Flavius Vespasianus, certainly a pivotal figure in Roman history through his decisive role in restoring stability and prosperity to the empire, following the relative chaos of the year of the four emperors, that being 68 to 69. As the founder of the Flavian Dynasty, Vespasian ascended to power in AD 69, leveraging his extensive military experience and pragmatic leadership to quell rebellions and consolidate imperial authority. And so his reign, spanning from 69 AD to 79, is notably marked by significant infrastructural advancements, most prominently the commissioning of the Flavian Amphitheater, which is now commonly known as the Colosseum, something that of course survives as a symbol of Rome's architectural ingenuity, but also its social grandeur. But he also implemented crucial fiscal reforms that stabilized the economy, including the introduction of the fiscus judaicus and the reorganization of the imperial finances, which enhanced the empire's economic resilience in very uncertain times. Additionally, his efforts in rebuilding and expanding Rome's infrastructure, including public buildings, roads, aqueducts, and many more, showed again his commitment to urban development and the welfare of the people he ruled. A pragmatic approach to government, characterized by both military strength and economic prudence, a reign that earned him widespread respect among not only the Senate, but the populace too. And welcome to the channel. I hope that if you are new to the channel, you found the introduction to your liking, and those returning, it's good to see you again. As always, the best way to support the channel is just to enjoy it in whatever capacity you deem fit. But a like, subscribe, and a comment always helps grease the wheels on the algorithm too. It'll make both of us happy. Now, without further ado, let's jump right in. Vespasian was born in the village of Falacrine, located northeast of Rome. His mother was Vespasia Pola, and his father was a tax and debt collector, no doubt very popular, the life of all the parties. Now we get most of our information from the work of Suetonius, who left us with quite a nice little biography. So I'm going to dive right in to the work of Suetonius, which describes a little bit about Vespasian's mother, his early life, and just about how he was as a young boy and how this affected his later reign. So we now read from Suetonius. Pola, who was born of an honorable family at Nursia, had for father Vespasius Pollio, twice tribune of the soldiers and prefect of the camp, while her brother became a senator with the rank of praetor. There is moreover on the top of a mountain near the 6th milestone on the road from Nursia to Spoletium, a place called Vespasiae, where many monuments of the Vespasii are to be seen, affording strong proof of the renown and antiquity of the house. I ought to add that some have bandied about a report that Petro's father came from the region beyond the Po River and was a contractor for the day laborers who came regularly every year from Umbria to the Sabine district to till the fields, that he settled in the town of Reate and there married. Personally, I have found no evidence whatever of this, in spite of rather careful investigation. Vespasian was born in the Sabine county in a small village beyond Reate called Falacrina, on the evening of the 15th day before the calends of December, in the consulate of Quintus Sulpicius Camerinus and Gaius Pompeius Sabinus, 5 years before the death of Augustus. He was brought up under the care of his paternal grandmother, Tertulla, on her estates at Cosa. Therefore, even after he became emperor, he used to constantly visit the home of his infancy, where the manor house was kept in its original condition, since he did not wish to miss anything which he was wont to see there, and he was so devoted to his grandmother's memory that on religious and festival days he always drank from a little silver cup that belonged to her. End of the first account from Suetonius, and we will be going back and reading more parts of Suetonius, because it's just such a fantastic biography. So, we know that he received his education in the rural area of Cosa, which is near present-day Ansedonia in Italy, under the tutelage of his paternal grandmother. Consequently, even after ascending to the throne, as Suetonius had said, he frequently returned to this place and preserved his villa in its original state, like a kind of monument to his childhood. In his early years, he was somewhat eclipsed by his elder brother, Titus Flavius Sabinus, who engaged in public life and followed the cursus honorum, commanding a significant military position in the Danube region. To qualify for praetorship, Vespasian required 2 terms of service in the lesser magistracies, one in a military capacity, and the other in a civic role. Vespasian served in the military in Thrace for approximately 3 years. Upon his return to Rome, around 30 AD, he secured a position within the lower magistracies, the Vigintivirate, most likely overseeing sanitation, these kinds of issues. Certainly good experience for him when he was going to repair the aqueducts at a later date. His initial performance was so inadequate, however, that Emperor Caligula allegedly filled his toga with handfuls of filth to address the neglected Roman streets, which were officially his duty. That's one way to send a message to an employee. Throughout Sejanus's rise to power, there is no documentation of Vespasian participating in really anything notable, at least in terms of political manners. Upon concluding his term in the lower magistracies, Vespasian was eligible to run for the position of quaestor, the senatorial office. However, his absence of political or familial influence resulted in Vespasian serving as a quaestor in a provincial position in Crete, rather than as an aide to prominent figures in Rome. Not the job that he wanted, but stepping stones, of course. Subsequently, he required the acquisition of praetorship, which conferred imperium. However, non-patricians and those with lesser connections were obliged to fulfill at least one intermediary position, whether that be aedile or perhaps tribune. Vespasian's initial endeavor to secure an aedileship, however, was unsuccessful, but he did achieve success in his subsequent attempt, attaining the position in 38 AD. Notwithstanding his minimal familial ties or accomplishments in office, he attained praetorship in either 39 or 40, at the youngest permissible age, that being 30 years old. Yes, there was an age limit, amidst a tumultuous political climate, of course, regarding electoral organization. his enduring association with the woman Antonia Caenis, the confidential secretary to Antonia Minor, who was, by the way, the emperor's grandmother, and a member of the emperor's court, rather. Well, that may have facilitated this success. Once more, its friends in high places tend to be able to wriggle your way to the front a little bit. Following the ascension of Claudius to the throne in 41, Vespasian was designated legate of Legio II Augusta, located in Germania, due to the patronage of the imperial freedman Narcissus. In 43, Vespasian and the Second Augusta took part in the Roman invasion of Britain, where he reportedly excelled under the supreme command of Aulus Plautius. Following his involvement in significant initial confrontations on the Medway and Thames River, he was dispatched to subdue the southwest, advancing through the contemporary counties of Hampshire, Wiltshire, Dorset, Cornwall, and a few more, likely aiming to secure the southern coastal ports and harbours, as well as those coveted tin mines of Cornwall and the silver and lead mines of Somerset. From there, Vespasian advanced from Noviomagus Reginorum, modern-day Chichester, to conquer the antagonistic Durotriges and Dumnoni tribes, seizing 20 Oppida towns, likely hill forts, including Hod Hill and Maiden Castle in Dorset. After this, he invaded Vectis, which was the old Roman name for the present-day Isle of Wight, ultimately establishing a fortress and a legionary headquarters at Isca Dumnoniorum, modern-day Exeter. He sustained an injury, however, during this period, and he didn't fully recover until his arrival in Egypt. Of course, these were quite a few achievements, and they granted him a triumphal regalia upon his return to Rome. His triumph as the legate of a legion secured him a consulship in 51, after which he withdrew from public life, having provoked the animosity of Claudius's wife Agrippina, the most powerful and influential figure of her husband's reign, not someone who you wanted to get on the bad side of. He emerged from retirement in 63, when he was appointed governor of the province of Africa, and that's quite a lot of responsibility, because that's where all the grain comes from. Tacitus characterized his rule as infamous and odious, whereas Suetonius described him as upright and highly honorable. Tacitus is generally pretty harsh on people. Suetonius recounts an incident where Vespasian was actually bombarded with turnips. Vespasian utilized his time in North Africa judiciously. Ex-consuls typically regarded governorships as opportunities to extract substantial sums of money to recuperate the wealth expended on their prior political campaigns. Corruption was so incredibly pervasive that it was nearly anticipated that the governor would return from these appointments with his pockets filled with coin. Nevertheless, Vespasian utilized his time in North Africa to cultivate relationships rather than accumulate wealth, a pursuit that would prove significantly more advantageous in the future, playing the long game. While in North Africa, he encountered financial difficulties and was compelled to mortgage his estates to his brother. In an effort to restore his fortunes, he engaged in the mule trade and acquired the moniker Mulio. Not sure if that's a good moniker to have or not. While upon returning from Africa, Vespasian accompanied Nero on a tour of Greece, but he fell out of favor with the emperor after allegedly neglecting to pay adequate attention, some accounts even suggesting that he kept being caught sleeping on the job, especially at one time where he was actually sleeping during one of Nero's famous lyre performances. Don't want to fall asleep doing that, resulting of course in political marginalization. Well, in 66, Vespasian was designated to quell the Jewish insurrection which was occurring in Judea. The conflict resulted in the death of the former governor and the defeat of Cestius Gallus, the governor of Syria, during his attempt to re-establish order. 2 legions, accompanied by 8 cavalry squadrons and 10 auxiliary cohorts, were dispatched under Vespasian's command, while his elder son, Titus, arrived from Alexandria with an additional force. During this period, he became the patron of Flavius Josephus, a Jewish resistance leader apprehended at the siege of Jodhat, who would subsequently document his people's history in Greek. We still have this to this day. It's used as quite a interesting source. Ultimately, thousands of Jews perished in the revolt, and the Romans obliterated numerous towns to reassert control over the province. They also captured Jerusalem in AD 70. Now Josephus, writing as a Roman citizen in his work Antiquities of the Jews, depicts Vespasian as a just and compassionate official, in contrast with the infamous Herod Agrippa II, whom Josephus extensively vilifies as a tyrant and a villain. During the emperor's patronage, Josephus documented the following the destruction of Jericho by the Roman Legio X Fretensis, led by Vespasian on the 21st of June, year 68. Vespasian captured a group of Jews, presumably Essenes from Qumran, bound them, and cast them into the Dead Sea. Why did he do this? Well, he wanted to test this reputed buoyancy of the Dead Sea. While the captives surfaced after being cast into the water from the boats. Science. Mission accomplished, I suppose. At the conclusion of the Jewish War, Josephus referenced a prophecy from sacred scripture, indicating that at the time of Jerusalem and the Second Temple's destruction, an individual from their own nation would assume the role of governor of the habitable earth, which is basically akin to the Messiah. Josephus construed the prophecy as signifying the administration of Vespasian. Tacitus concurred that the prophecy pertained to Vespasian and also to Titus, but he asserted that the common people, with their usual blindness of ambition, had interpreted these mighty destinies of themselves and could not be bought even by disasters to believe the truth. Of course, we arrive to the year 68, and Nero dies. In this year, Rome experienced a series of ephemeral emperors and a year of civil conflict and confusion. Galba was assassinated by Otho's supporters. He didn't last long, and he was subsequently vanquished by Vitellius. Otho's adherents, seeking an alternative candidate, chose to endorse Vespasian. Suetonius reports that a prevalent prophecy in the eastern provinces asserted that future world rulers would emerge from Judea. Vespasian ultimately concluded that this prophecy pertained to him and discovered several omens and oracles that corroborated this conviction. Despite Vespasian and Titus's decision to contest the Principate in February 69, they took no action until later in the year. During the initial months of 69 AD, Vespasian frequently conferred with the eastern generals, Gaius Licinius Mucianus, was a significant ally of his. Mucianus, the governor of Syria and the commander of 3 legions, maintained political affiliations with numerous influential Roman military leaders, from Illyricum to Britannia, due to his service under the renowned Neronian general Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo. In May 69 AD, Mucianus officially urged Vespasian to confront Vitellius. His appeal was succeeded by Vespasian's formal declaration as emperor in early July of the same year. Following directives from Prefect Tiberius Alexander, the legion stationed in Alexandria pledged allegiance to Vespasian on July 1st. Vespasian's Judean legions promptly followed on July 3rd, succeeded by Mucianus's Syrian legions on the 15th of July. Vitellius, the reigning emperor, commanded the veteran legions of Gaul and the Rhineland. However, support for Vespasian was rapidly intensifying, leading the armies of Pannonia, Illyricum, and Moesia to declare allegiance to him. Of course, if you've got the military on your side, that's the pointy end of the stick, thereby establishing him as the de facto ruler of half the Roman Empire. And who's going to argue? While Vespasian was in Egypt securing the grain supply, his troops, led by Marcus Antonius Primus, entered Italy from the northeast. They vanquished the forces of Vitellius, stationed in Mevania and Bedriacum, plundered Cremona, and proceeded towards Rome. Vitellius swiftly negotiated a peace with Antonius. However, the emperor's Praetorian Guard compelled him to maintain his position. Following intense and bloody combat, the forces of Antonius made a full invasion upon Rome. Amidst all the ensuing chaos, the capital was consumed by the flames, and Sabinus, Vespasian's brother, was slain by an angry mob. Rest in peace to poor old Sabinus. While upon learning of his rival's defeat and demise in Alexandria, the emperor promptly dispatched essential grain supplies to Rome, accompanied by an edict pledging to annul Nero's laws, particularly those concerning treason. Get a few people off the hook on that one, I'm sure. During his time in Egypt, he also visited the temple of Serapis, where he apparently had a vision of his greatness. Subsequently, he was approached by 2 laborers who believed he possessed a miraculous divine power. And that was, of course, all the proof that he needed. Tiberius Julius Alexander served as the Praefectus Aegypti, having held the governorship since the reign of Nero, and on the 1st of July, 69 AD, he declared Vespasian emperor in Alexandria. The prefect was of Hellenized Jewish lineage, Hellenized being Greek, the word Hellenic meaning Greek, and was connected to Philo of Alexandria. Now, the significance of the Egyptian grain harvest, which in Latin is known as claustra annone, really key to the grain supply, to Rome enabled Vespasian to consolidate authority over the entire empire. If they didn't want him to be emperor, the grain gets cut off. So you either accept him or you all starve to death. Well, there's only really one way to go for that, isn't it? And so Vespasian was the inaugural emperor, and pharaoh, by the way, since Augustus, to actually visit Egypt. At the Alexandria Hippodrome, he was acclaimed as pharaoh, reminiscent of Alexander the Great's reception at the oracle of Zeus Ammon in Siwa Oasis. Vespasian was declared the progeny of the creator deity Amun. Emulating the ancient pharaohs, and an embodiment of Serapis in the tradition of the Ptolemies being the Macedonian Greek family that ruled over Egypt for many dynasties. In accordance with Pharaonic tradition, Vespasian exhibited his divine selection through the customary acts of spitting on and trampling a blind and disabled man, whom he subsequently healed miraculously, as asserted by Egyptian religious authorities. Not sure about that one. If anybody has tried this, please let me know in the comments. Vespasian was officially proclaimed emperor by the Senate on the 21st of December, 69, while he was in Egypt, following the enactment of the Lex de Imperio Vespasiani. The Egyptians had previously declared him emperor in the summer. It was only a matter of time until the Senate followed suit. The administration of the empire was temporarily entrusted to Mucianus, with the assistance from Vespasian's son, Domitian. Mucianus initiated Vespasian's reign with tax reforms aimed at revitalizing the emperor's finances. Following Vespasian's arrival in Rome in mid-70, Mucianus persistently urged him to maximize tax collection. This ought to be interesting. So Vespasian and Mucianus reinstated previous taxes and spent quite a good deal of time discussing how they could make up completely new ones, augmenting provincial tribute as well, and they also closely monitored the treasury officials. Now, the Latin proverb means pecunia non olet, meaning money does not stink, might have actually originated when Vespasian put a tax on urine in public toilets. Like I said, they were trying really, really hard to find every possible way to do new taxes. Well, prior to Vespasian, this tax was instituted by Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD. I suppose it wasn't completely his idea, but it was abolished for a period and reinstated by Vespasian around AD 70 to replenish the treasury. Of course, the policy was poorly received by his son Dio Cassius and Suetonius. In their historical accounts of Vespasian noted, when Titus found fault with him for contriving a tax upon public conveniences, he held a piece of money from the first payment to his son's nose, asking him whether the odor was offensive to him. When Titus said no, he replied, "Yet it comes from urine." Now, going to back to this whole urine thing, I know I don't want to talk about it too much, but, well, it's kind of important. It's an eccentricity, isn't it? That phrase, "money does not stink," has been employed to obfuscate the questionable or illicit origin of funds ever since. It is a little bit debatable whether this was the true origin of the phrase, but it seems pretty obvious that it was. Prove me otherwise, I suppose. Well, in the early 70s, Vespasian remained in Egypt, the origin of Rome's grain supply, and had not yet departed for Rome. Tacitus reports that his journey was postponed because of the inclement of weather. Contemporary historians propose that Vespasian had secured and was maintaining support from the Egyptians prior to his departure. Accounts of Vespasian's miraculous healings, of course, disseminated throughout Egypt. But you can never get away with the unpopularness of taxes. Protests erupted in Alexandria, resulting in delays in grain shipments. Vespasian ultimately re-established order, however, leading to the resumption. But we'll read a little bit from Suetonius about his time in Egypt. and, well, how things got a little bit out of control for him. Therefore, beginning a civil war and sending ahead generals with troops to Italy, he crossed meanwhile to Alexandria to take possession of the key to Egypt. There he dismissed all his attendants and entered the temple of Serapis alone to consult the auspices as to the duration of his power. And when after many proprietary offerings to the gods he at length turned about, it seemed to him that his freedman, Basilides, offered him sacred boughs, garlands, and loaves, as is the custom there. And he knew well that no one had let him in, and that for some time he had been hardly able to walk by reason of rheumatism, and was besides far away. And immediately letters came with the news that Vitellius had been routed at Cremona, and the emperor himself slain at Rome. Vespasian as yet lacked prestige and certain divinity, so to speak, since he was an unexpected and still new-made emperor. But these were also given him. A man of the people who was blind, and another who was lame, came to him together as he sat on a tribunal begging for help for their disorders, which Serapis had promised in a dream, for the god declared that Vespasian would restore their sight if he would spit upon them, and give strength to the leg if he would deign touch it with his heel. Though he had hardly any faith that this could possibly proceed, and therefore shrank before making the attempt, he was at last prevailed upon by his friends, and tried both things in public before a large crowd, and with success. At this time, the direction of certain soothsayers and vases of antique workmanship were dug up and consecrated at the spot of Tegea in Arcadia, and on them was an image very like Vespasian. So I do rewind a little bit there, but I just love going back to Suetonius. Well, of course, the popularity did not last for too long. Alongside the insurrection in Egypt, turmoil and civil conflict persisted throughout the remainder of the empire. Judea had been in revolt since 66. Titus, the son of Vespasian, ultimately quelled the insurrection by capturing Jerusalem and demolishing the Jewish temple. Eusebius states that Vespasian commanded the pursuit of all descendants of the royal lineage of David, resulting in the persecution of Jews across various provinces. Numerous contemporary historians propose that Vespasian, informed by Josephus of his prophesied ascension to emperorship while in Judea, likely responded to prevalent messianic prophecies of the era to mitigate any potential rival claimants from that lineage. Titus participated in the consecration of a new Apis bull in Memphis in 70, and during Vespasian's reign, imperial patronage was extended to Egyptian temples, including those at Dakhla Oasis in the western desert, as well as Esna, Medinet Habu, and Silsila in the Nile Valley. In contrast, the Jewish temples were not so lucky. The Jewish temple at Leontopolis was plundered in 73. Back on the continent, in January of year 70, a revolt transpired in Gaul and Germany, referred to as the Second Batavian Rebellion. The insurrection was led by Gaius Julius Civilis and Julius Sabinus. Sabinus, asserting his lineage from Julius Caesar, proclaimed himself Emperor of Gaul, and Vespasian did not like that. The insurrection vanquished and incorporated 2 Roman legions before being quelled by Vespasian's son-in-law, Quintus Petilius Cerealis. At the conclusion of 70 AD, it was all over. Better luck next time. Moving into the mid-70s, Vespasian initially arrived in Gaul, commencing his tribunation from years July 1st, 69. Vespasian promptly initiated a series of measures to maintain his authority and avert subsequent insurrections. He presented gifts to numerous individuals in the military and a significant portion of the public. Troops loyal to Vitellius were either dismissed or penalized. Vespasian reformed the senatorial equestrian orders by expelling his adversaries and incorporating his supporters. The regional autonomy of Greek provinces had also been abolished. Furthermore, he undertook substantial efforts to manage public perception of his governance. And you know what that means. Numerous contemporary historians observed the profligation of propaganda during Vespasian's rule. A facet of the propaganda was the theology of victory, which justified the entitlement to govern through triumphant conquest. This pertained to Vespasian's triumph in Judea, of course. Narratives of a supernatural emperor designed to reign permeated the empire. Approximately 1/3 of all the coins minted in Rome during Vespasian's reign commemorated military triumphs. The term vindex was eliminated from coins to avoid evoking memories of the insurrectionist by the same name. Construction projects featured inscriptions lauding Vespasian and denouncing preceding emperors. A temple of tranquility was erected in the forum as well. Vespasian sanctioned histories composed during his life, guaranteeing the elimination of biases against him. Fortunately, we have both Suetonius and Tacitus, who provide us with differing perspectives. Now, initially, Vespasian provided monetary incentives to authors. The ancient historians of the era, including Tacitus, Suetonius, and Josephus, express a favorable view of Vespasian, while also denouncing the preceding emperors. Tacitus is a little less favorable, though. He acknowledges that Vespasian elevated his status, while Josephus designates Vespasian as a benefactor and savior. Simultaneously, Pliny the Elder devoted his natural histories to Titus, the son of Vespasian. Individuals who opposed Vespasian, of course, faced retribution, and several Stoic philosophers faced accusations of corrupting students through improper teachings and were subsequently expelled from Rome. Helvidius Priscus, a pro-republican philosopher, was executed for his doctrines. Many philosophers and writers had their works confiscated, destroyed, and were condemned for being considered excessively critical of Vespasian's rule, with some even facing this fate after their death. And so from 71 to 79, a significant portion of Vespasian's reign remains a little bit of a mystery. Historians indicate that Vespasian commissioned the construction of multiple edifices in Rome. Moreover, he endured multiple conspiracies directed at him. He facilitated the reconstruction of Rome following the Civil War, and that was a big job. He incorporated the Temple of Peace and the temple dedicated to the deified Claudius. In 75, he constructed a monumental statue of Apollo, initiated during Nero's reign, and he consecrated a stage of the theater of Marcellus. He commenced the construction of the Colosseum, utilizing resources acquired from the plunder of the Jewish temple following the siege of Jerusalem. Suetonius asserts that Vespasian faced persistent conspiracies directed at him throughout the reign, but only one of them is specifically known. In 78, or perhaps 79, Epidus Marcellus and Aulus Caecina Aelianus conspired to assassinate Vespasian. The reasons for these men's betrayal of Vespasian unfortunately remain a bit of a mystery. Now, we have a little bit more from Suetonius about the personality of Vespasian, or at least how Suetonius saw his personality. And we'll read now from that before we lead off for the video. He was well built, with strong, sturdy limbs, and the expression of one who was straining. Apropos of which a witty fellow, when Vespasian asked him to make a joke on him, also replied rather cleverly, "I will, when you have finished relieving yourself." He enjoyed excellent health, though he did nothing to keep it up except rub his throat and other parts of his body a certain number of times in the court, and to fast one day every month. This was in general his manner of life. While emperor, he always rose very early, in fact before daylight. Then, after reading his letters and all the reports of all the officials, he admitted his friends, and while he was receiving their greetings, put on his shoes and dressed himself. After dispatching any business that came up, he took time for a drive, and then for a nap, lying with one of his concubines, of whom he had taken several after the death of Caenis. After his rest, he went to the bath and dining room, and it is said that at no time he was more good-natured or indulgent, so that the members of his household eagerly watched for these opportunities to make requests of him. Not only at dinner, but on all other occasions, he was most affable, and he turned off many matters with a jest, for he was very ready with sharp sayings, albeit of a low and buffoonish kind, so that he did not even refrain from obscene expressions. Yet many of his remarks are still remembered, which are of full fine wit, and among them the following. When an ex-consul called Mestrius Florus called his attention to the fact that the proper pronunciation was plaustra rather than plostra, he greeted him the next day as Flaurus. When he was importuned by a woman who said that she was dying for love with him, he took her to his bed and gave her 400,000 sesterces for her favors. Being asked by his steward how he would have the sum entered in his accounts, he replied, "To a passion for Vespasian." During his 9th consulship, Vespasian experienced a minor illness in Campania. He promptly returned to Rome, and subsequently travelled to Aquae Cotylae in the vicinity of Raete, where he spent each summer. It was here where his condition deteriorated, and he passed away of severe stomach issues. And that's it, the life of Vespasian. Titus, a Roman emperor who ruled from AD 79 to AD 81. He was the eldest son of Emperor Vespasian, his predecessor, rendering him an essential figure in the Flavian Dynasty. Prior to his ascension as emperor, Titus distinguished himself as a capable military leader, notably during the Jewish War, when he seized Jerusalem in AD 70. His victory in Jerusalem and the ensuing destruction of the temple were crucial in solidifying his reputation for military excellence. His brief tenure as emperor was characterized by numerous calamities, including the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, which obliterated the city of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a fire that devastated Rome itself for 3 days in AD 80, succeeded by a plague for good measure. But notwithstanding these adversities, Titus was cherished by the Roman citizenry for his endeavors to assist the disaster affected, and for his overall magnanimities and accessibility, qualities that set him apart from the conventional authoritarian Roman leader that everyone was used to. He commenced extensive reconstruction efforts and organized elaborate public spectacles to elevate the morale of his populace. But he died abruptly in AD 81 and was succeeded by his younger sibling Domitian. His was a reign that was short, but frequently deemed compassionate and efficient, cementing his legacy as an excellent leader during one of Rome's most arduous epochs. Hello and welcome. Talking about Titus today. I'm sure you're excited. As always, I enjoy the spirited conversations in the comments, and I'd like to hear what you think. So do tell me. Well, without further ado, let's get on with it. The life of Titus. Now, most likely, he was born in 39 AD. Around the end of December. We do know he was born in Rome as the firstborn son of Titus Flavius Vespasianus, who was later known as Emperor Vespasian, and his mother was Domitian the elder. Now he had two younger siblings. The first was a sister named Domitian the younger, who was born in 45 AD, and he also had a brother, Titus Flavius Domitianus, who would, of course, as we've just mentioned, become Emperor Domitian. He was born in 51 AD. Now, what kind of world was our Titus born into? Well, it was not a very nice one. You see, the 1st century BC had been a time of significant civil unrest, to say the least, and it had led to the eventual decline of Rome's old aristocracy. Times were changing. Well, by the early 1st century AD, a new nobility had begun to rise. The Flavian family, to which Titus belonged, well, they came from humble origins. But despite all of that, they had achieved wealth and prominence, and in just a few generations, largely during the reign of the Julio-Claudian emperors. Now Titus's great-grandfather, Titus Flavius Petro, had served as a centurion under Pompey during Caesar's civil war. But he fled the battlefield during the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, which is not a good way to gain a reputation. But it seems that despite this disgrace, Petro improved his status by marrying Tertulla, a wealthy woman whose resources helped secure the family's future. That's one way of doing it. Now on to Petro's son, Titus Flavius Sabinus I, who was the grandfather of the Titus we're talking about. Well, he used his wealth to advance his career as a tax collector in Asia and a banker in Helvetia, two very popular professions, gaining equestrian rank. Well, by marrying Vespasia Pola, he linked his family to the noble patrician gens Vespasia, paving the way for his own sons, including, of course, Vespasian, to finally ascend to the senatorial class. And so just like that, in a few generations, they'd clawed their way up. Now Vespasian's political career saw him rise through the ranks of quaestor, aedile, and praetor, eventually becoming consul in 51 AD, which was also the year that Domitian was born. He gained recognition as a military leader during the Roman conquest of Britain in 43 AD. Now on to the early life of Titus. We're actually pretty lucky to have a nice little account from Suetonius. According to him, Titus was raised at the imperial court alongside the son of Emperor Claudius, whose name was Britannicus. Unfortunately, Britannicus didn't last too long, as he was actually assassinated by Nero in 55 AD. But a little bit more detail from Suetonius now. I'll read from the account of his biography. Suetonius states, even in boyhood, his bodily and mental gifts were conspicuous, and they became more and more as he advanced in years. He had a handsome person, in which there was no less dignity than grace, and was uncommonly strong, although he was not tall of stature, and he had a rather protruding belly. His memory was extraordinary, and he had an aptitude for almost all the arts, both of war and of peace. Skillful in arms and horsemanship, he made speeches and wrote verses in Latin and Greek with ease and readiness, and even offhand. He was, besides, not unacquainted with music, but sang and played the harp agreeably and skilfully. I have heard from many sources that he used always to write shorthand with great speed, and would amuse himself by playful contests with his secretaries. Also, that he could imitate any handwriting that he had ever seen, and often declared that he might have been the prince of forgers. End of the account from Suetonius. Well, that certainly paints a picture of a rather interesting young man, isn't it? Well, we'll skip forward a little bit. Now, between 57 and 59, he served as a military tribune in Germania, which is probably the most chaotic place you could have served at that time. He additionally served in Britannia, and likely came around 60 with the reinforcements required following Boudicca's insurrection. You see, Boudica was the queen of the Iceni tribe up in Britannia, who almost had the Romans. There's always that image of her on that frightening chariot charging in. Maybe a video on the Boudican revolt soon, maybe. Well, at approximately 63 years of age, he returned to Rome, and he was married to Arrecina Tertulla, who was the daughter of Marcus Arrecinus Clemens, a former prefect of the Praetorian Guard. But unfortunately, she passed away between 65 years of age. Titus then married Marcia Furnilla, who hailed from a more esteemed lineage. Marcia's family was intimately connected to the resistance against Nero. Her uncle Barea Soranus and his daughter Servilia were among the casualties of the unsuccessful Pisonian plot of 65. Certain contemporary historians believe that Titus actually annulled his marriage due to his wife's familial ties to that conspiracy, after he found out later on. Well, either way, Titus did not remarry, and seemingly had daughters. At least one of them was with Marcia Furnilla. The sole individual recognized to have reached adulthood was one Julia Flavia, possibly the child of Titus and Arrecina, whose mother also bore the name Julia. During this time, Titus was also engaged in legal matters, and for all his hard work, he managed to achieve the position of quaestor. In 66, the Jewish population of Judea province insurrected a rebellion against the Roman Empire. Cestius Gallus, the legate of Syria, was vanquished at the Battle of Beth Horon and compelled to withdraw from Jerusalem. King Agrippa II, one who was in favor of Rome, and his sister Berenice escaped to Galilee, where they subsequently surrendered to the Romans. Nero designated Vespasian to suppress the uprising, who was immediately sent to the area with the 5th and 10th legions. Subsequently, Titus arrived at Ptolemais with the 15th. The Romans, comprising 60,000 professional soldiers, readied themselves to advance across Galilee and go to Jerusalem. Now, in terms of our sources for this, we have Josephus, a Roman Jewish historian who was around at the time. He extensively documented the history of war in his work, The War of the Jews. Josephus acted as a captain at the city of Jotvat during the Roman invasion of Galilee in 67. Following a protracted siege of 47 days, the city finally capitulated, resulting in an estimated 40,000 casualties. But Titus, however, he was not merely focused on concluding the conflict. Well, after surviving one of the multiple group life-takings, Josephus capitulated to Vespasian and was taken prisoner. He then stated that he had supplied the Romans with intelligence regarding the ongoing insurrection, and by 68 the Roman army had controlled the entire coast of northern Judea, achieving major victories at Tarichae and Gamala, where Titus demonstrated his skill as a capable strategist. But the final and most crucial fortified city maintained by the Jewish resistance was Jerusalem. The campaign abruptly ceased at the announcement of Nero's demise. Concurrently, the Roman Senate proclaimed Galba, the governor of Hispania, as emperor, and Vespasian, he opted to await additional instructions and dispatched Titus to welcome the new princeps. Prior to arriving in Italy, Titus discovered that Galba had been assassinated and succeeded by Otho, the governor of Lusitania, while Vitellius and his forces in Germania were mobilizing to advance upon the city with the aim of deposing Otho. To avoid the peril of being captured by either faction, he terminated his journey to Rome and reunited with his father in Judea. Concurrently, Otho was vanquished in the first battle of Bedriacum, and subsequently, the writing on the wall took the self-checkout line. Now, upon receiving the news, all of those soldiers who were stationed in Judea and the province of Egypt assumed control and proclaimed Vespasian as emperor the 1st of July, 69 AD. Vespasian acquiesced, and following discussions by Titus, allied with Gaius Licinius Mucianus, the ruler of Syria. A formidable contingent from the Judean and Syrian legions advanced towards Rome under Mucianus's leadership, while Vespasian proceeded to Alexandria, delegating authority to Titus to quell the Jewish insurrection. By the conclusion of 69 AD, Vitellius's forces had been defeated, and Vespasian was formally proclaimed emperor by the Senate on the 21st of December, therefore concluding the year of the 4 emperors. Now, at the same time, the Jews became entangled in a civil conflict by fracturing the resistance in Jerusalem into multiple factions. You see, the Sicarii under Menachem ben Judah did not endure for too long. The Zealots, led by Eleazar ben Simon, ultimately succumbed to the Galilean leader John of Gush Halav, and the other northern rebel commander, Simon bar Giora, succeeded in asserting control over the Idumeans. Of course, Titus steps in and lays siege to Jerusalem. The Roman army was reinforced by the formidable 12th Legion, who was previously vanquished under Cestius Gallus, while Vespasian dispatched Tiberius Julius Alexander, the governor of Egypt, from Alexandria to serve as Titus's second in command. And so, in comes Titus to encircle the city, with legions 5, 12, and 15, one on the western flank and one legion 10 on the Mount of Olives to the east. He exerted pressure on the food and water resources of the residents by permitting pilgrims to enter the city for Passover celebrations, and thereafter not letting them leave, which is one hell of a strategy, you've got to admit. Overburdened, there was simply not enough food and water to go around. Well, the Roman army was persistently troubled, however, by Jewish incursions, one of which almost led to the capture of Titus himself. Well, following Josephus's unsuccessful negotiations for surrender, the Romans renewed their assault and swiftly penetrated the first and second walls of the city. Titus commanded the crucifixion of the Jewish deserters around the city wall to instill fear in the resistance. And at one point, the Jews were depleted by starvation, and upon the breakthrough of the frail third wall, intense and bloody hand-to-hand combat erupted. Ultimately, the Romans seized the Antonia fortress and commenced a direct attack on the gates of the Second Temple. Upon breaching the gate, the Romans ignited the upper and lower city, culminating in the obliteration of the temple. Upon the extinguishing of the fires, Titus commanded the obliteration of the remaining city, purportedly aiming for the name of Jerusalem to be forgotten forever. The temple was destroyed, and Titus's soldiers declared him imperator in recognition of their triumph. And thus Jerusalem was pillaged, resulting in the death or dispersal of a significant portion of the inhabitants. Josephus asserts that over 1 million individuals perished during the siege, but this might be a little bit of an exaggeration. In fact, modern scholarship dismisses this estimate as, frankly, implausible, given that over 1 million individuals were in the land of Israel at that time in total, with half of them being Jewish, and significant Jewish communities persisted in the region post-war, including in the severely affected area of Judea. Nonetheless, around 97,000 individuals were apprehended and enslaved, including Simon Bar Giora and John of Giscala. A multitude sought refuge in regions surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Titus allegedly declined to take a victory wreath, asserting that he had not achieved the triumph independently, but had served as the instrument of divine retribution against his people. Well, back to Josephus. According to him, the Jewish diaspora at the fall of the temple was located in Parthia, which is kind of like modern-day Persia. We have Babylonia, Arabia, and some individuals went beyond the Euphrates to a place called Adiabene, which in these days you can find referred to as Kurdistan. Now Titus, unable to voyage to Italy in winter, hosted grand events at Caesarea Maritima and Berytus, before proceeding to Zeugma on the Euphrates, where Vologases I of Parthia bestowed upon him a crown. During his journey to Antioch, he affirmed the customary rights of the Jewish population in that city. En route to Alexandria, Alexander paused in Memphis to consecrate the sacred Apis bull. Suetonius indicates that this incited alarm, as the ceremony necessitated, by tradition, Titus donning a diadem, a symbol that the Romans had linked to monarchy. and that certainly puts off a few alarm bells, and the allegiance of Titus's legions had already sparked concerns regarding a potential insurrection against his father. Of course, Titus hastily returned to Rome to dispel any doubts over his behavior. Upon his arrival in Rome in 71, Titus received a triumph. Accompanied by Vespasian and Domitian, he entered the city, receiving an exuberant welcome from the Roman citizens, and preceded by an opulent parade featuring war riches and, of course, captives. Josephus depicts a procession featuring substantial quantities of gold and silver transported along the road, succeeded by intricate reenactments of the conflict, Jewish captives, and ultimately the treasures seized from the Temple of Jerusalem, including the menorah and the Pentateuch. Simon Bar Giora was taken to the Forum and executed, and the procession concluded with religious sacrifices at the Temple of Jupiter. The Arch of Titus, located at one entrance of the Forum, commemorates his victory. Now, back to Vespasian for a while. Upon his declaration as emperor, Titus and his brother Domitian were conferred the title of Caesar by the Senate, which of course is a pretty big deal. Titus, besides sharing tribunician authority with his father, had 7 consulships throughout Vespasian's rule, and served as his secretary, representing him in the Senate. Significantly, he was designated Praetorian Prefect, therefore securing the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard and reinforcing Vespasian's status as a legitimate sovereign. Thus, Titus gained significant infamy in Rome at this time for his brutal conduct, often commanding the immediate death of alleged traitors. In 79, when a conspiracy by Aulus Caecina Aelianus and Epirus Marcellus to depose Vespasian was revealed, Titus invited Aelianus to dinner and, commanded his assassination before he exited the room. No dessert, I assume. Of course, during the Jewish wars, Titus commenced a romantic relationship with Berenice, the sister of Agrippa II. You see, the Herodians allied with Romans throughout the insurrection, and Berenice herself actually endorsed Vespasian in the bid for the imperial throne. In 75, she rejoined Titus and lived with him in his palace. The Romans were apprehensive regarding the Eastern Queen and disapproved of their association. Of course, when the duo were publicly condemned by the cynics in the theater, Titus simply succumbed to the pressure, and he expelled her. This didn't do much to fix his reputation, however. That continued to deteriorate. And speaking of deterioration, so did Vespasian. He succumbed to an illness in late June of 79 AD, and promptly replaced by his son, Titus. He was the inaugural Roman emperor to ascend the throne following his biological father. You see, Titus, as pharaoh of Egypt, assumed the titulary autocrator Titus Caesarus Hunefer Benermeret, which means Emperor Titus Caesar, the perfect and popular youth. Due to his numerous purported vices, many Romans worried that he would simply become another Nero, and nobody wanted that. But contrary to such assumptions, once Titus became emperor, he gained widespread affection from the populace, who extolled him for embodying the highest virtues rather than vices. I suppose he's grown up now. Straighten up and fly right. And it was time to take off on his journey as the new emperor. Now, as soon as he got in, one of his initial actions was to mandate the cessation of trials predicated on treason allegations, which, well, that had been going on for quite some time, a long-standing affliction of the Principate. Now, the law of treason, or as was known, the law of majestas, was first designated to prosecute those who had corruptly impaired the people and majesty of Rome through any revolutionary acts or acts perceived to be revolutionary. You see, under Augustus, the same principle was reinstated to encompass slander and libel as well. This resulted in multiple trials and executions throughout the reigns of Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero, along with the establishment of informer networks that instilled fear into Rome's political system for decades. Think about it. When cash rewards are offered for dobbing people in, well, you take the chance and earn the money. I'm sure plenty of people got thrown under the bus for that one. Just like witch hunts. You know what it's like. Of course, Titus abolished this practice for himself and others, proclaiming, apparently his words, "It is impossible for me to be insulted or abused in any way, for I do naught that deserves censure, and I care not for what is reported falsely. As for the emperors who are dead and gone, they will avenge themselves, in case anyone does them a wrong, if in very truth they are demigods and possess any power." Fair enough, you can't argue with that, can't you? Well, as a result, no senators were executed during his tenure. That's right, not a one. He adhered to this commitment to hold the position of Pontifex Maximus and to maintain his hands untainted. Informants were subjected to public punishment and exile from the city. I suppose it's better than being executed. That being said, exile, depending on where you go, it's kind of a death sentence. Well, additionally, Titus prohibited injustices by rendering it illegal for any individual to be prosecuted under disparate laws for the identical offense. Now, onto the short reign, albeit devoid of significant military or political strife, of Titus. It was still characterized by these severe calamities that we've mentioned in the introduction. Now, several months following his ascension, Mount Vesuvius erupted. It's just about the worst thing that could happen. Now, the eruption nearly obliterated the city and vacation areas surrounding the Bay of Naples. These cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were entombed beneath meters of stone and ash, resulting in the deaths of thousands. Titus designated 2 former consuls to oversee and manage the relief initiative, personally contributing substantial sums from the imperial treasury to assist the volcano's victims. Furthermore, post-eruption he visited Pompeii, and again in the subsequent year, personally making his presence known. But the troubles were not over. Far from it, I'm afraid. In the spring of 80 AD, during his second visit, Rome caught on fire, and the fire consumed extensive areas of the city for 3 days and 3 nights. While the severity of the destruction was not as catastrophic as the Great Fire of 64, and notably spared numerous districts. Cassius Dio enumerates a significant array of vital public edifices that were actually obliterated, including Agrippa's Pantheon, the Temple of Jupiter, sections of the Theatre of Pompey, and many others. Titus once again personally reimbursed for the affected areas. Suetonius reports that a plague then erupted concurrently with the fire. The characteristics of the sickness, however, and the mortality rate remain unidentified. But if it is the case that a plague has been noted, well, we can assume that it was notable. If you want to look at it in those terms, well, certainly not something that you want after the fire anyway. Just adds a little bit of salt in the wound. Well, at the same time, up in Britannia, hostilities recommenced, where Gnaeus Julius Agricola advanced deeper into Caledonia and successfully established multiple forts. Titus was awarded the title of Imperator for the 16th time, between the 9th of September and the 31st of December 79 AD due to his actions. His reign also witnessed the insurrection orchestrated by Terentius Maximus. A little interesting because he was one of these several impostors that claimed to be the reincarnation of Nero during the 70s. You see, despite Nero's reputation as a universally despised tyrant, evidence suggests that he maintained considerable popularity in the eastern provinces for a significant portion of his reign. Now, claims of Nero's survival following his overthrow were exacerbated by ambiguous circumstances surrounding his demise and several prophecies that predicted his resurgence. Now, Cassius Dio states that Terentius Maximus bore quite a striking resemblance to Nero, and not just in the way that he looked, but in the way that he spoke, and similarly performed vocalizations accompanied by the lyre. Terentius garnered a following in Asia Minor, but was subsequently compelled to escape beyond the Euphrates, seeking sanctuary among the Parthians. Furthermore, there's also a few sources that indicate that Titus actually uncovered a conspiracy by his brother Domitian against him. But even though this was obviously a grave offense, he had declined to execute or even exile him. Apparently they just made up. Well, the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, also referred to as the Colosseum, commenced in 70 under Vespasian and was ultimately finished in 80 AD under Titus. The structure served not only as a grand source of entertainment for the Roman public, but also as a monumental tribute to the military successes of the Flavians in the Jewish wars. The original games spanned 100 days and were characterized by their extravagance, of course featuring gladiatorial contests, battles involving wild creatures, we're talking up to elephants, lions, everything in between, and they even flooded the arena for simulated naval engagements. That's pretty good for the time. Well, of course, wooden bowls inscribed with various prizes, such as clothing, gold, or even slaves were dropped into the crowd during the games, which might subsequently be exchanged for whatever item was written on there. Now, next to the amphitheater, within the grounds of Nero's Golden House, Titus commissioned the construction of a new public bathhouse, the Baths of Titus. The building's construction was expedited to align with the completion of the Flavian Amphitheater. Of course, that wasn't all. The imperial cult was also reinstated by Titus, but nonetheless it encountered its own challenges. You see, Vespasian was not deified until 6 months after his death. So, to commemorate the Flavian Dynasty, foundations were established for the temple of Vespasian and Titus, which was eventually completed under Domitian. Better late than never, as they say. And so, at the conclusion of what is known as the secular games, Titus formally consecrated the amphitheater and the baths in what constituted his last documented act as emperor. He departed for the Sabine lands, but succumbed to illness at the initial posting station, where supposedly, as the story goes, he died of a fever in the very same farmhouse that his father had. Now, Titus governed the Roman Empire for slightly more than 2 years, from his father's demise in 79 AD until his own death in the middle of September 81 AD. Of course, as we know, Domitian succeeded him, and his initial act as emperor was to deify his brother, which is, well, that's pretty nice of him, isn't it? But the story's not quite over yet. You see, historians have conjectured about the precise circumstances of his demise and the era to which Titus referenced in his last words. You see, reportedly his last words were, "I have made but one mistake." Well, what on earth does that mean? Well, Philostratus suggested that he was poisoned by Domitian using a sea hare, and that Apollonius of Tyana had prophesied his demise. Suetonius and Cassius Dio assert that he succumbed to natural causes, however both implicate Domitian for abandoning the ill Titus. Was that the error? Trusting his brother? Surely it couldn't have been that bad with the initial act of deifying him right after his death. But was this a cover-up? Well, Cassius Dio perceived the error as failing to execute Titus's brother. Remember, there was that overt conspiracy against him. Perhaps Titus's soft heart was what got him in the end. That being said, it's hard when it's family, isn't it? Of course, the Jews certainly give him a pretty bad review for obvious reasons, which brings us to the Babylonian Talmud, who gives us a more gritty account of Titus's death, although it's a little bit far-fetched. But let's talk about it anyway, because there's nothing better than the gritty details. So, the Babylonian Talmud ascribes Titus's demise to an insect that entered his nostril and gnawed at his brain for 7 long years, echoing another tradition concerning the biblical king Nimrod. Rabbinic law states that Titus was a descendant of Esau, who audaciously confronted God. While Jewish legend holds that Titus was afflicted by God himself for the destruction of the Second Temple and ultimately perished due to that little gnat entering his nostril, leading to significant swelling and resulted in death. A narrative recounts that Onkelos, a nephew of the Roman Emperor Titus, who demolished the Second Temple, seeks to convert to Judaism and invokes spirits to assist in his decision-making process. Each delineates his retribution in the afterlife. Onkelos, son of Kolonikos, resurrected Titus through sorcery and inquired who holds the most esteem in the afterlife, to which he responded, Israel. What, then, did he inquire regarding their inclusion? And he stated, their practices are onerous, and you will be unable to fulfill them. Engage them in combat against that realm, and you will ascend to the prominence as foretold. Her foes shall become the leaders, and those who oppress Israel shall attain supremacy. He then inquired, "What is your retribution in the afterlife?" To which he responded, "What I determined for myself. Daily my ashes are gathered, my sentence is rendered upon me. I am incinerated, and my ashes are dispersed over the 7 seas. Well, that's the end of the account from the Babylonian Talmud. Well, they certainly gave him a poor review, didn't they? Of course, Titus's reputation among the ancient historians outside of the Babylonian Talmud, well, it's perhaps the most distinguished of any emperor. You see, the existing records from the era, predominantly authored by his contemporaries, so those who were there to see it at the time, depict a notably favorable perspective. You see, his character has notably thrived in contrast of that of his brother Domitian. Well, the Wars of the Jews provides a first-hand description of the Jewish insurrection and the persona of Titus. The impartiality of Josephus's writings has been scrutinized, mainly due to his financial obligations to the Flavians. In 71 AD, he landed in Rome as part of Titus's retinue, and even acquired Roman citizenship, adopting the Roman nomen Flavius and praenomen Titus from his sponsors, granted an annual stipend, and resided in the palace. So, of course, you wouldn't want to be, well, talking badly about your boss, biting the hand that feeds. So, Josephus, well, he composed all of his extant works at Rome, under the patronage of the Flavian family. You see, the War of the Jews exhibits bias toward the leaders of the insurrection by depicting the resistance as feeble and completely disorganized, even attributing the war's inception to the Jews themselves. Of course, Jews in modern times certainly challenge his credibility as a historian. Well, I think we can hear from Cassius Dio and Suetonius before we go. Cassius Dio composed his Roman history more than a century after Titus's demise, but it's still worth something. You see, he possessed a rather comparable perspective to Suetonius, which we'll get to in a moment, potentially utilizing the latter as a reference, although he exhibits greater restraint by acknowledging that, and I quote, "His satisfactory record may also have been due to the fact that he survived his accession but a very short time, for he was thus given no opportunity for wrongdoing. For he lived after this only 2 years, 2 months, and 20 days, in addition to the 39 years, 5 months, and 25 days he had already lived at that time. In this respect, indeed, he is regarded as having equaled the long reign of Augustus, since it is maintained that Augustus would have never been loved had he lived a shorter time, nor Titus had he lived longer. For Augustus, though at the outset he showed himself rather harsh because of the wars and factional strife, was later able, in the course of time, to achieve a brilliant reputation for his kindly deeds. Titus, on the other hand, ruled with mildness, and died at the height of his glory. Whereas, if he had lived a long time, it might have been shown that he owes his present fame more to good fortune than to merit. End of the account from Cassius Dio. And, as promised, we can't miss out on Suetonius. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I absolutely love Suetonius. Nothing weird about that. I'm just saying that it's kind of the go-to for these kinds of emperors and these characters. It's really great. A very detailed history that's not surface level. So, the account about the death of Titus. In the meantime, he was cut off by death, to the loss of mankind rather than to his own. After the finishing of the public games, at the close of which he wept bitterly in the presence of the people, he went down to the Sabine territory, somewhat cast down, because a victim had escaped as he was sacrificing, and because it had thundered from a clear sky. Then, at the very first stopping place, he was seized with a fever, and as he was being carried on from there in a litter, it is said that he pushed back the curtains, looked up to heaven, and lamented bitterly that his life was being taken from him, contrary to his deserts. For he said that there was no act of his life which he had cause to repent, save one only. What this was, he did not himself disclose at the time, nor could anyone easily guess. Some think that he recalled the intimacy which he had with his brother's wife, but Domitian swore most solemnly that this did not exist, although she would not have denied it if it had been in the least true, but on the contrary, would have boasted of it, as she was most ready to do of all of her scandalous actions. He died in the same farmhouse as his father, on the Ides of September, 2 years, 2 months, and 20 days after succeeding Vespasian in the 42nd year of his age. When his death was made known, the whole populace mourned, as they would for a loss in their own families. The Senate hastened to the house before it was summoned by proclamation, and with the doors still shut, and then with them open, rendered such thanks to him, and heaped such praise on him after death, as they had never done, even when he was alive and present. Domitian, born in AD 51 as Titus Flavius Domitianus, and ruling as the Roman emperor from AD 81 until 96, when he was assassinated, marking the end of the Flavian Dynasty. His tenure is notable for its authoritarian nature. He styled himself as the new Augustus, aiming to restore Rome's grandeur. He focused on law and order and significantly enhanced the empire's infrastructure, gaining popularity among the military and general populace for his hands-on administrative approach and major construction projects. But despite his unpopularity with the Senate due to his autocratic methods and perceived paranoia, he did manage to strengthen the economy through monetary revaluation and improved provincial governance. And thus his reign, although marked by stability and prosperity, was also one riddled with conspiracies, leading to his untimely end at the hands of his own court officials. Hello and welcome. Here we are again, back to Roman times, doing a few Roman emperors lately. There's a few that I hadn't covered, so it's good to go back and do that. Now, as always, tell me what you think in the comments, or just like the video. It does wonders for the algorithm. And just enjoy. We can begin. Get yourself nice and comfortable for the life of Domitian. So the story starts October 24th, 51 AD, and we find ourselves smack bang in the middle of Rome, where Domitian was born as the youngest son of his father Titus Flavius Vespasianus, who was later known as Emperor Vespasian, and his mother, Flavia Domitilla Major. Now, he had an older sister too, who was named Domitilla the Younger, and he had a brother by the name Titus Flavius Vespasianus. The Flavian family, or as it's more commonly known in the Latin tongue, the gens Flavia, rose from what is pretty much relative obscurity to prominence over the course of 4 generations. You see, they accumulated their wealth and their status during the reign of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So we go back to Domitian's great-grandfather, Titus Flavius Petro, and he served as a centurion for Pompey during the Roman civil wars. But he ended his career in disgrace after he deserted at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. Well, that's not the way to quit your job at all. It's hard for people to forget that one. But it wasn't all over. You see, Petro's fortunes improved through his marriage to Tertulla, who was a woman of considerable wealth, which of course allowed their son, Titus Flavius Sabinus, Domitian's grandfather, to gain further wealth and rise in status. So, Sabinus took roles as a tax collector in Asia and a banker in Helvetia, which, well, that's modern-day Switzerland, if we're going to look at it in modern terms, just to give you an idea of where we're talking. Of course, one of the provinces of the Roman world at the time. Now, all this helped, of course, to elevate the family to equestrian status, so no longer just simple commoners. Now they have some money and a little bit of power that goes along with it, always walking hand in hand. Now, onto Sabinus's marriage to Vespasia Pola, who was from the noble gens Vespasia, i.e. Vespasian the emperor. Well, that cemented the family's advancement even more, leading both of their sons, Titus Flavius Sabinus and Vespasian, to achieve senatorial rank. Now you see, Vespasian's own career advanced through various political offices, including quaestor, aedile, praetor, and finally, in 51 AD, he was made consul. Of course, that was the same year that Domitian was born. So on to his military career that gained significant recognition after his participation in the Roman conquest of Britain in 43 AD. Now, the ancient accounts suggest that the Flavian family faced poverty during Domitian's early years, with Vespasian reportedly falling out of favor with emperors Caligula and Nero. That being said, it doesn't take much to fall out of favor with that lot, doesn't it? However, in terms of what modern historians think about it, well, it's been largely discredited, noting that they likely originated from Flavian propaganda, which sought to emphasize the accomplishments of Claudius, who reigned from 41 to 54, and his son Britannicus, while downplaying the legacy of the Julio-Claudian emperors. So there's that to think about. But in reality, the Flavians, well, they seem to enjoy imperial favor during the 40s and up to the 60s AD. While Domitian's older brother, Titus, was educated alongside Britannicus at the imperial court, Vespasian continued to build his career. Well, after a brief period of retirement, Vespasian re-emerged as a political and military figure under Nero, serving as proconsul of Africa in 63 AD and later accompanying the emperor on an official tour of Greece in 66. Well, when a revolt broke out in Judea that same year, sparking the First Jewish-Roman War, Vespasian was appointed commander of Roman forces in the region, with his son Titus commanding a legion. This whole situation is very complicated with the Jewish-Roman wars. I've got about a 3-hour video, I think, explaining all of it. We're not going to go into too much detail with it now. We'll just pass over it briefly as it's all relevant. Now, among the 3 emperors of the Flavian Dynasty, Domitian's reign would ultimately be the longest, though his early life and career were largely overshadowed by his elder brother Titus. You see, while Titus gained military fame during the First Jewish-Roman War, Domitian was given honors but no significant responsibilities following their father Vespasian's rise to the throne in 69 AD following the Year of the 4 Emperors. You see, at just 16 years old, Domitian had already lost both his mother and his sister, while his father and brother were away leading the Roman forces in Germania and Judea respectively. Of course, this left poor old Domitian to spend most of his youth without close family around him. And that, no doubt, has an effect on a boy, don't you think? Well, during these Jewish-Roman conflicts, Domitian was likely under the guardianship of his uncle, being Titus Flavius Sabinus II, who was the city prefect of Rome, though it may have been under the guardianship of Marcus Cocceius Nerva, who was also a close ally of the family, who would later succeed Domitian as emperor. Of course, we'll wheel back to him at the end of the video, so don't worry, we'll hear his name again. Now, Domitian received a typical aristocratic education. He studied rhetoric, literature, Greek, all that sort of thing. Now, Suetonius, in the Lives of the 12 Caesars, paints him as an intellectually sharp youth who could readily quote poets like Homer and Virgil. Of course, Homer is the one who had wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad, being among his most famous works, and Virgil writing the Aeneid, which I'm sure you've all read. Well, he also wrote early works on law and poetry, this being Domitian, showing this inclination towards intellectual pursuits. But you see, unlike Titus, Domitian didn't receive courtly education, and while there's no solid evidence of formal military training, Suetonius does mention that Domitian had considerable skill in archery. Now, Suetonius, in terms of his accounts, provides an extensive description of Domitian's appearance, noting his tall stature and handsome features in his youth, though he also highlights Domitian's later physical decline, which is unfortunate. He described Domitian as having a dignified look, large but weak eyes, and cramped toes. Over time, he suffered from baldness, a protruding stomach, and thin legs weakened by illness. Domitian was reportedly very self-conscious about his baldness, which he covered with wigs, and according to Suetonius, he even wrote a book on hair care, which is ironic for a bald guy. Now, the accounts of Domitian's personality, well, they're a little bit more mixed. Suetonius and other ancient sources alternatively depict him as cruel, lethargic, or as an intelligent and refined ruler. Now, it's kind of difficult with these contradictory portrayals, makes it quite hard to understand Domitian's character. Perhaps we have to stand somewhere in the middle. but there is a consistent pattern that suggests that he was less charismatic than his father and brother. He also was said to be prone to distrust, had a peculiar sense of humor, and often communicated in cryptic ways. His isolation had grown as he aged, possibly as a result of losing most of his immediate family to war or illness by the time he was only 18. Once again, has an effect on a boy. The political upheavals of the 60s, too, including the civil war that led to his family's rise to power, also deeply shaped his world view and personality, contributing to his increasingly solitary nature as emperor. Of course, among the notable events of the time, the late 60s, was the death of Nero, June the 9th, 68 AD, which ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Well, I suppose Nero ended it himself. Now you see, there were 4 Roman generals, being Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, and they fought for the control of the empire after the death of Nero. No doubt you can imagine how that went. Chaos. Death all over the place. Well, Nero's death reached Vespasian as he prepared to besiege Jerusalem. The Senate also named Galba governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, which is modern-day northern Spain. I think it's kind of Andalusia. Now, they named him emperor. Instead of continuing his campaign, however, Vespasian sent his son Titus to greet the new ruler and await for further instructions. Before reaching Italy, however, Titus learned that Galba had been assassinated and replaced by Lusitania's Otho. Vitellius and his Germanian forces advanced to Rome to overthrow Otho. Titus returned to his father in Judea to avoid capture and keep his head down until things calmed down a little bit. One can hardly blame him. Well, Otho and Vitellius realized Vespasian and his forces were a threat. You see, Vespasian controlled Egypt, and if you know anything about Egypt in Roman times, you know if you control Egypt, you control the grain, the breadbasket of the empire. Well, he was also stationed there with 80,000 men, including 4 legions. Or rather, he was stationed in Judea, but having quite a control over the African and Near Eastern provinces with these 4 legions. Now you see, his brother Titus Flavius Sabinus II was Rome city prefect and garrison commander, making the Flavians a growing power. You see, while Galba and Otho ruled, Vespasian did nothing, despite rising tensions. After Vitellius defeated Otho at the First Battle of Bedriacum, Judea and Egypt's legions declared Vespasian emperor on July the 1st, 69 AD. Gaius Licinius Mucianus, the governor of Syria, joined up with Vespasian to go out and fight Vitellius. Mucianus led Judean and Syrian troops to Rome, while Vespasian went to Alexandria and left Titus to quell the Jewish uprising. Vitellius house arrested Domitian in Rome to prevent a Flavian uprising, but he lost support as more troops across the empire supported Vespasian. You see, Vitellius' army was finally defeated at the Second Battle of Bedriacum by Vespasian's forces under Marcus Antonius Primus on October 24, 69 AD. Thus, Vitellius negotiated a peaceful surrender, albeit out of complete desperation. The Titus Flavius Sabinus II agreement required Vitellius to resign voluntarily. and thus Vitellius's Praetorian Guard opposed abdication as dishonorable. Vitellius returned to the imperial palace at the last minute on December 18th after trying to surrender the imperial insignia at the Temple of Concord. Roman officials declared Vespasian emperor at the home of Sabinus. Vitellian troops soon attacked Sabinus's forces, which forced him to retreat back to the Capitoline Hill. And throughout the night, he was accompanied by his relatives, including Domitian. The forces of Mucianus approached Rome. However, the beleaguered Flavian faction could not endure for more than a day. On December 19th, Vitellian's forces stormed the capital, resulting in the capture and execution of Sabinus after a skirmish. Domitian evaded capture by masquerading as a devotee of Isis and secured refuge for the night with Cornelius Primus, who was a supporter of his father. But by the afternoon of the 20th of December, Vitellius was dead, his forces having been vanquished by the Flavian legions. And so Domitian, having no further fears, approached the invading armies. He was widely acclaimed with the title of Caesar, and the assembled men escorted him to his father's residence. On the 21st of December, the Senate then declared Vespasian emperor of the Roman Empire. Now, despite the formal conclusion of the war, a pervasive condition of chaos and lawlessness ensued in the initial days following Vitellius's demise. Order was effectively re-established by Mucianus in early 70 AD, but Vespasian did not arrive in Rome until September of that year. During this period, Domitian served as the representative of the Flavian Dynasty in the Roman Senate. He was conferred the title of Caesar and designated praetor with consular authority. Now, Tacitus characterizes Domitian's inaugural Senate speech as succinct and deliberate, while also highlighting his skill in circumventing uncomfortable inquiries. Domitian's authority was mostly superficial at this time, presaging his function for at least another decade. Mucianus effectively wielded power during Vespasian's absence, meticulously ensuring that the 18-year-old Domitian would not exceed the limits of his role. Stringent oversight was enforced over the young Caesar's retinue, expelling Flavian generals like Arrius Varus and Antonius Primus, and substituting them with more dependable ones, such as Arrecinus Clemens. Mucianus equally constrained Domitian's military aspirations. So you see, this civil war of 69 AD significantly destabilized the provinces as well, and that resulted in other local insurrections, including the much larger Batavian revolt in Gaul. Well, despite the swift suppression of the insurrection, inflated accounts of catastrophe compelled Mucianus to leave the capital with his own forces. Domitian ardently pursued the chance to achieve military distinction and allied himself with fellow officers with the aim of leading his own legion. Tacitus indicates that Mucianus was reluctant about this prospect, yet he deemed Domitian a burden in any role assigned to him, thus opting to keep him nearby rather than in Rome. Upon receiving news of Cerealis' triumph over Civilis, Mucianus discreetly advised Domitian against further military pursuits. Domitian subsequently corresponded with Cerealis, proposing that he relinquish leadership of his army. Nevertheless, he was once more rebuffed. Upon the death Upon the return, rather, of Vespasian in late September, his political function became nearly redundant, prompting Domitian to retreat from governance and dedicate himself to the arts and literature, which I'm sure is a lot more palatable than politics. Well, while Domitian's political and military career was a failure, his personal life was certainly not. Well, Vespasian tried to arrange a dynastic marriage between his youngest son and Julia Flavia, Titus's daughter, in 70 AD, but Domitian was determined to marry Domitia Longina, even persuading her husband, that's right, her husband, Lucius Aelius Lamia Plautius Aelianus, to divorce her. Imagine someone coming to you and saying, I would like to marry your wife. I mean, she's your wife. No, times have changed, I suppose. Well, despite all this, of the early follies, the relationship actually elevated both dynasties. A revered general and statesman in Armenia, Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo, had a younger daughter named Domitia Longia. After the failed Pisonian conspiracy against Nero in 65, he took his own life. She was the granddaughter of Augustus's granddaughter, Junia Lepida. Now, that recent marriage revived senatorial dissenters and advanced Flavian propaganda to undermine Vespasian's political achievements under Nero, while Nero's victims were vindicated. The sole son of Domitia and Domitian was born in the year 80 AD, but unfortunately he did not make it past the age of 3 years old. Now, when Domitian became emperor, he gave Domitia the honorary title of Augusta and deified their son, who appears on the reverse side of coins from this era. Now, the 83 marriage appears to have had some major issues. You see, Domitian exiled Domitia for unknown reasons, but he later reinstated her either out of love or response to rumors about his relationship with his niece, Julia Flavia. It is believed that these actions were motivated by her inability to bear children. Thus, Domitia returned to the palace at 84 and lived there throughout Domitian's reign, without any real notable incident. Her empressship and influence in Domitian's administration are more or less undocumented, suggesting that it was either limited or just covered up somehow. Now, Suetonius says that she accompanied the emperor to the amphitheater, while Josephus also praises her many benefits. But that's pretty much all we really have. We do know that Domitian did not remarry and may have had more children. Well, there was also quite a few accusations of infidelity and divorce around the time after 84, but it does seem, at least from Suetonius, that this marriage was generally a happy one in its later years. Well, either way, before officially becoming emperor, Domitian's role in the Flavian administration was mostly a ceremonial one. You see, Titus had triumphed in Judea back in June of 71, and you see tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of Jews died in this insurrection. The Romans then destroyed Jerusalem and its temple, took most of its valued possessions, and imprisoned and enslaved about 100,000 people. Not unique. That's generally what happens to anyone that the Romans conquer. Now, the Senate awarded Titus a Roman triumph for his victory, and on the celebration day the Flavian family entered the capital with a lavish parade of war prizes. A big old party. Vespasian and Titus led the family parade, with Domitian on a little white horse and other Flavian relatives following behind. Now, what about the leaders of the Jewish resistance? Well, they were executed right there in the Forum Romanum, followed by a parade concluding with a ritual of offerings at the Temple of Jupiter. Now, the Arch of Titus, that triumphal arch, was constructed at the southeast entrance of the Forum to commemorate the victorious conclusion of the war. The return of Titus further emphasized the relative insignificance of Domitian, both in military and political context. Now, Titus, as the eldest and most seasoned of Vespasian's sons, shared tribunician authority with his father, held 7 consulships, obtained the censorship, and commanded the Praetorian Guard. These privileges unequivocally indicated his status as the designated heir to the empire. As the second son, Domitian possessed honorary titles, including the aforementioned Caesar, but also the Princeps Juventutis, along with several priestly roles, such as Augur, Pontifex, Frater, Magister Frater Alvalium, and a few other. However, he had no post within the actual imperium. He also had 6 consulships during the rule of Vespasian, but only one of these in 73 was a regular consulship. The last 5 were subordinate suffect consulships, which he occupied in 71, 5, 6, 7, and 79, typically substituting for his father or brother in mid-January. Now, although ceremonial, these positions gave Domitian valuable Senate experience and may have influenced his later skepticism. Now, non-Flavian Dynasty members were mostly barred from public office under Vespasian and Titus. Mucianus disappeared around this time from history, and likely he died somewhere out in the middle of nowhere between 75 and 77. The Flavian faction, in reality, had real power, while the Senate was only there pretending to be democratic. Titus's effective co-emperorship with his father ensured Flavian policies continued even after the death of Vespasian on the 24th of June, 79. Titus promised Domitian full governance partnership, but he was not granted tribunician authority or imperium during his brief rule. And of course, as we head into the year 79, we talk about the 2 major disasters. Can you guess what they are? Well, in October or perhaps November 79 AD, it was the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum in meters upon meters of lava and ash. The same year, a 3-day fire in Rome destroyed several important public buildings. Titus spent much of his reign organizing relief efforts and restoring damaged property. He died of fever in Sabine territory on September the 13th, 81, after 2 years in government. That's right, a short reign. Now you see, ancient writers have actually accused Domitian of murdering his brother, or simply abandoning the sick and ailing Titus. And some even claim that he conspired against him. Now the bias of the sources certainly makes it difficult to verify these comments. Now you see, Domitian had barely seen Titus since the age of 7. So really they didn't have much of that familial or brotherly attachment. perhaps he was just another person standing in his way. Well, either way, despite the relationship or lack of, Domitian showed very little compassion as his brother died, instead going straight to the Praetorian camp and saying, "Hello, I'm here, he's dead. Can I be proclaimed the emperor now?" No wonder people thought that the brother had something to do with his death. I mean, he could have at least put on a few crocodile tears just to put people's suspicions away. Yeah. Well, either way, Domitian received tribunician power, Pontifex Maximus, Augustus, that title meaning venerable, and Pater Patriae, the title meaning father of the country, from the Senate on September the 14th. He quickly abandoned his father and brother's republican facade as emperor. Domitian made the Senate obsolete by moving government to the imperial court. You see, Pliny the Younger says Domitian saw the Roman Empire as a divine monarchy, and he was its benign despot. Domitian, who held absolute power now, saw the emperor as a cultural and moral authority over all aspects of daily life, the top dog, the head honcho even. Now, to start this new age, he launched ambitious economic, military, and cultural projects to restore the empire to that former glory of Augustus. Notwithstanding all these ambitious plans, Domitian was absolutely resolute in his commitment to manage the empire diligently and meticulously. He engaged directly in all sectors of the administration. Decrees were promulgated regulating the minutiae of daily existence and legislation, while taxation and public ethics were also stringently upheld in all regard. Once again, Suetonius, that fantastic source who's among my favorite, he asserts that the imperial bureaucracy functioned most efficiently under Domitian, whose stringent standards and, frankly, distrustful disposition ensured historically low levels of corruption among province governors and elected officials. Now remember, it's much easier to be corrupt if you're a provincial governor. It's a little bit more difficult if you're in Rome. There's too many eyes on you. Too many people are watching. But if you're out somewhere in Gaul or something like that, people aren't really going to notice if you slip a few coins into your pocket every now and then. I'm not speaking from experience. I'm just commenting. Well, despite the lack of pretense about the Senate's importance under his autocratic regime, he expelled many senators that he personally considered to be unworthy. And in appointing public officials, he seldom favored relatives, a practice that, of course, strongly contrasted with the nepotism exhibited by Vespasian and Titus. No, Domitian was more about a meritocracy. Now that's a new idea. Of course, Domitian valued loyalty and adaptability in strategic appointments, which he saw more often in the equestrian order than in his senate or the family, whom he actually distrusted and quickly fired if they opposed imperial policy. Now, more than any emperor since Tiberius, Domitian's prolonged absences from the city emphasized his authoritarianism. You see, under Domitian, power moved from Rome to the emperor, despite the Senate's declining power since the fall of the Republic. The imperial court lived at Alba, Circe, and sometimes elsewhere before the Flavian palace on the Palatine Hill was built. Domitian also travelled through Europe, spending at least 3 years in Germania and Illyricum, fighting for the borders of the empire. He built many luxurious homes for himself too, because why not? Including the Villa of Domitian in the Alban Hills, which is about 20 kilometers away from Rome. I think that's about 12 miles, maybe something like that. He built Rome's Palatine Hill Palace of Domitian as well. He also had 7 more villas, all the way from Tusculum to Terracina. Well, unfortunately, the only site that we have left is Sabaodia. Now, 79 AD, there was a rather terrible fire, and it destroyed many of the buildings on the field of Mars. The Stadium of Domitian was inaugurated in 86 AD as a gift to Rome's citizen as part of an imperial construction initiative, and it was Rome's first permanent athletics venue, and is now the Piazza Navona. Of course, it's not all fun and games. The invasion of Britain was also persisting under the leadership of Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who extended the Roman Empire to Caledonia. That's present-day Scotland, by the way. Now, in 82, Domitian established a new legion, Legio I Minervia, to combat the Chatti. He's recognized for the easternmost trace of Roman military activity, the rock inscription near Boyukdash mountain in contemporary Azerbaijan, which you can still find. Now, the inscriptions of Caesar, Augustus, and Germanicus indicate that the associated march occurred somewhere between 84 and 96 AD, certainly a long way from home. Now, of course, you've got to look after the army, and Domitian managed the Roman military with the same care he did for all other government sectors. His contemporaries questioned his military's strategic skills, however, but these were mostly propaganda despite the many victories. Well, Tacitus called that victory over the Chatti as a mock triumph, and criticized his retreat to Britain after Agricola's victories. Domitian dedicated 3 years of his reign to military campaigns, which was more than any emperor since Augustus, and increased the soldiers' pay by 1/3, indicating his popularity among them. Of course, nothing gets you popular than giving people money. Well, despite military leadership criticisms of his tactical and strategic choices, the ordinary soldiers remained very loyal to him. Now, immediately after he became emperor, he didn't waste any time seeking that military fame. He visited Gaul in 82, or perhaps early 83, to do a census, and that was when he suddenly ordered that attack on the Chatti. Legio Minervia, that new legion, built 46 miles worth of road across Chatti territory to reveal the enemy's hideouts and facilitate infrastructure. Although little is known about the engagements, Domitian returned to Rome in 83 to celebrate an extravagant victory, and also take the title of Germanicus. Of course, that was the victory named as this sham triumph. Tacitus was not kind. Well, the fact that the Chatti were crucial to Saturninus's insurrection in 89 actually supports these claims. Because if you were really victorious over the Chatti, well, why are the Chatti here again? Didn't you tell us that you wiped them all out? Didn't you tell us that you subdued them? It's only been a few years, and here they are. Really makes you think. Well, in the biography of his father-in-law, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, Tacitus wrote one of the most detailed accounts of Flavian military operations, focusing on the conquest of northern Britain from 77 to 84. In 77 AD, Agricola became governor of Roman Britain and began military operations in Scotland, then known as Caledonia. And he certainly got quite busy. He crossed a waterway in 82 and defeated populations that were till that time unknown to the Romans. They certainly got well acquainted quite quickly. He strengthened the coastline near Ireland, and according to Tacitus, his father-in-law often said one legion and a few auxiliary could conquer the island. He protected an exiled Irish monarch that he hoped would justify a conquest. But as we all know, the conquest did not occur. Some historians believe that the passage was an exploratory or punitive trip to Ireland, however. Well, either way, after leaving, Agricola led a fleet past the Forth into Caledonia the following year. A large legionary stronghold was built at Incutil to aid the advance. At the Battle of Mons Graupius in summer 84, Agricola faced Calicagus' Caledonian forces. His attempts to rule Britain were thwarted when 2/3 of the Caledonian forces hid in the Scottish marshes and highlands, despite the Romans' heavy casualties. Domitian then summoned him back to Rome in 85, after nearly 6 years as governor, exceeding the Flavian consular legate term. Now, Tacitus claims Domitian ordered Agricola's recall because his victories in Germania outshone his. Man, Tacitus really does not like Domitian, doesn't he? Well, despite his expertise and reputation, Agricola never held a civic or military position again after receiving triumphal honors and a statue from the emperor. He was offered the governorship of Africa, however, but he declined. As Tacitus claims, this was either due to illness or Domitian's influence. Either way, after Agricola's return from Britain, the Roman Empire fought Dacia in the east. Domitian ordered a major strategic withdrawal from the British province in 88 AD to reinforce the war in the east. The Roman frontier moved 120 kilometers or 75 miles south when Incutil was demolished by the Caledonians and the forts and watchtowers were removed. The military may have disapproved of Domitian's withdrawal, but he saw these regions, so far away up there in Caledonia, as more of a financial burden. It really wasn't worth the candle to try and hold them, and it was just too difficult. Now, on to the Suebi, Sarmatians, and Dacians. Well, those were groups around northern Illyricum, and they began to besiege Roman cities along the Danube, posing the biggest threat to the Roman Empire in Domitian's reign. Sarmatians and Dacians were of course the biggest of these threats. The Dacians under King Decebalus crossed the Danube into Moesia in around 85 AD, and they destroyed the city. Then they killed the governor, Oppius Sabinus. Domitian initiated a counter-offensive by personally visiting the region with a large contingent led by his praetorian prefect, Cornelius Fuscus. Domitian returned to Rome to celebrate his second victory, after Fuscus drove the Dacians across the border in mid-85. Chalk that one up to the Romans winning. Now, Fuscus wasn't done yet, and he actually began a campaign in Dacia in 86, but it was quite disastrous. Fuscus was killed, and the Praetorian Guard lost their battle standard. A big insult. They've taken the eagle. Now, you see, losing this battle standard, or aquila, was a massive insult to Roman pride. Domitian returned to Moesia in the August of 86. He divided the province into Lower and Upper Moesia, and moved 3 legions to the Danube. The Romans invaded Dacia again in 87 under Titius Julianus and defeated Decebalus in late 88, in the same place as Fuscus fell. In 89, German border issues prevented an attack on Sarmigetusa, the Dacian capital. To avoid a war on 2 fronts, Domitian agreed to a peace agreement with Decebalus, allowing Roman forces to freely cross Dacian territory, and paying him 8 million sesterces annually. I think the latter part was probably the more important part of the deal. But of course, not everybody was happy with it. In fact, some of them had a frothing at the mouth rage at this deal. It wasn't a very good deal at all. So, they disagreed with the Romans, and they thought that it was a disgrace. Either way, Dacia remained a tranquil client state throughout Domitian's reign. But Decebalus strengthened his fortifications. Where did he get the money to do this? Well, the Romans gave it to him. 8 million sesterces goes a long way. Domitian likely sought a new Dacian conflict and added 2 Syrian cavalry units and at least 5 Pannonian cohorts to Upper Moesia. Trajan followed Domitian's lead and added 2 units to Upper Moesia's auxiliary forces, using them for his Dacian campaigns. And thus, the Romans did end up defeating Decebalus in 106. It took a while, but they got there. The Roman army suffered heavy losses, however. But Trajan did take Sarmizegetusa, and the Dacian gold and silver mines, so the capital and the resources now firmly in Roman hands. Some things are worth the wait. Now, on to matters not pertaining to war. We talk about Domitian's religious policy. It included laws and public morality. But you see, the construction projects around religion were the most visible. And in 85 he became a permanent censor, overseeing Roman morality and conduct. Once again, he took this job very seriously. He reinstated the Lex Iulia de Adulteris Coensendis, which punished adultery with exile. He removed a divorced equestrian who reconciled with his wife from the jury and a Senate ex-quaestor for dancing and performing. Domitian also cracked down on castration and banned eunuchs. I think we can all get behind that one. Now, others enacted similar restrictions, of course, but Domitian seems to have been the first. He also revived the imperial cult, which under Vespasian had declined. His first act of emperor was actually to deify his brother Titus. His young son and niece Julia Flavia were also deified after their deaths. Now Suetonius and Cassius Dio claim that Domitian became Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Well, that's a hell of a title. But he rejected the title of Dominus during his reign, and some historians believe that sycophants used it to gain his favor due to lack of official paperwork or coinage. He also built a dynastic tomb near Vespasian's former Quirinal home, and completed the temple of Vespasian and Titus to honor his father and brother, along with the Templum Divorum, Fortuna Redux, and Arch of Titus to commemorate the Flavian military victories. Domitian harshly punished public officials who took bribes, dismissing jurors and annulling legislations with conflict of interest. He ensured exile or death for defamatory works, especially those that were defamatory against him. Funny how that works, doesn't it? Similar skepticism surrounded actors, too. Those dramas, those comedies and tragedies, well, you were not allowed to make fun of him. Just don't do it. Thus, he also banned mimes from public performances, because he wasn't keen on them either. And philosophers, well, that kind of ground it to a halt. Now, back in Rome, Epictetus taught philosophy, and said that philosophers could gaze unwaveringly at tyrants. Well, he didn't last too long in Rome. He actually moved to Nicopolis, Greece, after Domitian's 94 AD edict expelled all philosophers from Rome. Well, he lived modestly, worked securely, and died of old age there, so it's not too bad. Do read Epictetus, by the way. He's one of my favorites. Now, there was also another incident in 87 where the Vestal virgins were found to have broken their perpetual public celibacy vows. The Vestals were the community's daughters, making this violation incestuous. Those convicted of such offences were sentenced to death, either by their own method or according to the old custom of putting them into a little room and bricking them in. That's right, not a good way to go. Slowly starving or dying of thirst in that dark little dank hole. Not good. Now, foreign relations were allowed, as long as they didn't disrupt the public order or integrated with Roman religion. You see, before Commodus, Egyptian deity worship flourished during the Flavian Dynasty. Serapis and Isis, associated with Jupiter and Minerva, were especially revered. Jewish and Christian persecution during Domitian's later rule is reported by Eusebius in the 4th century. Some believe the Book of Revelation and the first epistle of Clement were written around this time, with the latter referring to sudden and repeated misfortunes, which is possibly a reference to the Domitian persecutions. And despite a heavy taxation on Jews, no contemporary writers describe religious trials or deaths other than Roman ones. Now, you see, in general, most emperors did their best to pretend to be democratic, and the Senate implicitly recognized their monarchy. Now, some monarchs handled this arrangement poorly. You see, Domitian frequently appeared in the Senate as a victorious conqueror to show his contempt. Starting his reign, he emphasized his autocracy. He strongly disliked aristocracy and stripped the Senate of its decision-making power to limit its influence to administrative functions, relying on a select group of friends and equestrians to hold key government positions. And the antipathy was mutual. After Domitian's assassination, the Roman senators rushed to the Senate and passed a resolution to erase his memory. Senatorial historians portrayed Domitian as a tyrant during the Nervan Antonine dynasty. This evidence suggests Domitian accommodated senatorial views. His surprise allowed many provincials and potential enemies to become consuls and inaugurate the official calendar. His father and brother had centralized consular authority mostly within the Flavian family, and this reconciliation with divisive Senate factions comes to be quite questionable. You see, Domitian may have tried to sully these senators' reputations by appointing potential opponents as consuls, but after showing bad behavior, they were tried, exiled, or executed, and their property seized. According to Tacitus and Suetonius, persecutions increased toward the end of Domitian's reign, peaking around 93, or slightly after Suetonius' failed insurrection in 89. At least 20 opponents were executed, including Domitia Longina's ex-husband, Lucius Aelius Plautius, and Domitian's relatives, Titus Flavius Sabinus, Clemens, and Arecinus Clemens. Flavius Clemens, Domitian's cousin, named his 2 young children Vespasian and Domitian as his successors. Several of these men were actually executed in 83 or 85, disproving Tacitus's reign of terror during Domitian's final years. Now, Suetonius reports that some were convicted of corruption or treason, while others were up on lesser charges. Domitian basically rationalized all of these through suspicions. Well, he was killed September 18th, 96. Rest in peace, Domitian, in a conspiracy orchestrated by his court officials. Suetonius offers a comprehensive account of the scheme of the assassination, asserting that Parthenius, Domitian's chamberlain, was the principal architect of the conspiracy, and it's also suggested that Parthenius's probable apprehension regarding Domitian's recent execution of Nero's former secretary, Epaphroditus, might have served as a potential reason. The final straw, perhaps. Well, the act was executed by a freedman of Parthenius named Maximus and a steward of Domitian's niece, Flavia Domitilla, named Stephanus. Suetonius reports that several omens predicted Domitian's demise. In fact, the Germanic seer, one named Larginus Proculus, foretold the date of Domitian's demise, and for doing this, he was subsequently condemned to death by him. I suppose he didn't want to know. Well, in the days leading up to Domitian's assassination, he reportedly had a dream in which Minerva, the goddess who had long been his protector, appeared disarmed by Jupiter, foretelling that she could no longer defend him. Domitian was deeply affected by this omen and became increasingly anxious, particularly around midday, which he believed to be the time of his prophesied death. On the day of the assassination, he repeatedly asked a servant for the time. The servant, involved in the conspiracy, lied, and he told the emperor it was already late afternoon, which apparently made Domitian relax a little bit. And we all know what happens when you relax. He sat at his desk, signing documents, and Stephanus, a servant who had been feigning an arm injury, suddenly attacked him. Concealing a knife beneath his bandaged arm, Stephanus handed Domitian a document, and when the emperor read it, he stabbed him in the groin. Jesus, dude, why would you do that? That's not good. Well, Domitian struggled, of course, to defend himself, but was overwhelmed as other conspirators, including Claudianus Maximus, who was that freedman of Parthenius, Satur, a head chamberlain, and an imperial gladiator, joined in on the attack. Domitian was stabbed 7 more times before succumbing to his wounds, and in the scuffle, Stephanus was also fatally wounded. Domitian's body was hastily cremated by his attendant Phyllis, who later mixed his ashes with those of his niece Julia at the Flavian temple. As foretold, his death occurred at noon. Funny how that works. Well, Cassius Dio later suggested that the assassination was spontaneous, but Suetonius implied that it was a well-planned conspiracy, pointing out that Stephanus had faked his injury, and that Domitian's hidden sword had been removed from under his pillow. Some, including Dio, implicated Domitia Longina, Domitian's wife, though her loyalty to him cast doubt on this theory. The role of the Praetorian Guard, those notorious assassinators, remains uncertain, although it is believed that Titus Petronius Secundus, one of their commanders, was indeed aware of the plot. Immediately after the assassination, the Senate declared Marcus Cocceius Nerva as the new emperor. And with that, away goes Domitian, into the dustbin of history, like all the rest. Well, with that, we end our video, and I'm going to thank my top-tier supporters. Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Star Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizabo, Legitimus, Maverick, and Susan. Thank you very much. And I will see you in the next exciting video. Lots of love to you all. Good night.